You're listening to Big World Network.
Bloodshot Buck, Episode 12, Part 1. Written by W. H. Wood and Mitch K. Allan. Read by Willow Wood. Cosmi's soothing voice echoed across the buildings. "Docking Bay lockdown," she recited. "Docking Bay lockdown. All military personnel report for duty. All civilians do not enter the no zone." Outside was less organized than Ava had expected. Synths of all ranks filled the parade square, the air smelling of pressed uniform and recycled oxygen. Ava felt lost at the sight of hundreds of synths called to duty, and for the first time she understood, truly understood, that she was just a number. "Wow, this is serious," she muttered. "Yeah," said James, "who declared war while I was sleeping?" Michael shook his arms and bounced on the spot. "Mate, you should probably do something," he said. Michael tapped his empty lapel, indicating the rank James wore on his own chest. "It looks like we're falling in." Listening harder, Ava picked out the commands to fall in line from other non-commissioned officers like James. "Deploy Sterling Stern Voice!" Michael jeered. James scowled at him. "Shut up, Gibbon." "Sorry, did you say something?" Ugh. Ava hit Michael's stomach before he could finish his retort. "Watch it!" she hissed. They couldn't be seen to disrespect him. If they showed James no deference, why should anyone else? "Ugh! I didn't do anything!" Michael cried. "He's the one who called me Gibbon." Ava just gave him a hard look, too tired to argue. "Let's fall in." Lines of synths were starting to form, and she supposed it didn't matter where they joined rank. Just as she found a place in line, arms behind back, James's voice rose above the chatter. They hadn't worked together before the synth quarter. Ava had never been in a situation that called for him to pull rank. But she saw now that Sterling Stern Voice was a fitting description. If lions could speak, James could roar. It sent a shiver down her spine. "Stop pissing around!" he bellowed. "Get in line, now!" The chatter dimmed, eyes seeking him out, and Ava held her breath, expecting someone to mock the new NCO. "Whoa," said one bloke. "We're going, all right. What's with you?" A nearby sergeant honed in on this remark. She pointed at the outspoken synth with a flat hand and stared him down with fiery eyes. "Shut it! The corporal told you to fall in! Get your data on, now!" James gave her a nod of thanks. Ava couldn't resist a smug smile. Moments later, everyone stood in neat files of 30. Silent. Ava resisted the urge to look round at James, who probably stood at the back in a long line of NCOs. A lieutenant paced before each platoon. The man jaunting before Ava's platoon had such a bristly moustache he probably could have swept the streets with it. "Pay attention," he said. "This is serious. A justice is attempting to steal an Anashim knife and take it off quarter. Justicates are storming the cough as we speak. Where is EVA BUCK?" Ava stiffened, hearing the same question ripple across the parade square. Had she done something wrong? Did they know her eyesight was still a liability? "She's here," said Michael. Ava glared at him, and he shrugged. After claiming that she'd been found, the lieutenant recaptured her attention. "Buck." "Yes, sir." She braced. "Report to 2nd Justicate Arzima for questioning," he said. "You have been implicated." "What?" Ava tried not to tremble, positive she had nothing to do with stealing alien weaponry. Why? I don't know, the instructor cut across. But get moving. We don't have time to mess around. Just as he said this, movement to the right caught everyone's eye. A familiar Catharian sprinted through the rows of units, his destination obvious. He came to a fluid stop beside Ava's lieutenant.
Where is she?
Azuma asked. The lieutenant pointed.
Here, sir. Buck, fall out.
Nodding, Ava did as ordered. Michael whispered a few words of encouragement that she didn't quite catch, but it was too late to look back at him now. Before facing Justica Azuma, she tried to get a glimpse of James, hoping for reassurance, but between the rows of people she saw he'd already been given orders and sent off to find his post. "What's the problem, sir?" she asked Azuma.
We'll discuss it in the transporter,
he rumbled, the carapace on his face quivering from chin to forehead. Azuma took Ava's arm and set off. If he'd had more than 4 fingers, Ava would have mistaken his fleshy palm for human. The hard scales across the back of his hand gave the impression his grip would bite. Instead, it just hurt as he propelled her across the square. "I haven't done anything," Ava thought bitterly, and yanked her arm free. "I'm coming," she snapped when he looked around in surprise. "You don't have to drag me." And she stalked ahead towards the main road. "Sir?" Despite Azuma's promise of an explanation, neither of them spoke inside the transporter as it sped towards the center of operations. Ava stared at it and the multitude of lights shining at the top. The docking bay peaked above the atmosphere dome, and with the amount of light it produced right now, it shone like a star. Azuma took her arm again when they stepped out onto the sidewalk. She growled and resisted, but he wasn't letting go this time. Through the main doors, and then the body scanner, Ava began to sweat at the chaos that greeted them. She clenched her fingers, trying to rub them dry. "I want teams at every angle!" A Justicate charged across the lobby. She was a striking woman, tall and lithe. Every action she made punctuated the air, deliberate, calculated. One flick of her hand looked like it could knock a man out cold. "Get the ships covered," she barked. "If you gotta shoot Prout, you do it. Same goes for the beefcake helping her. Shoot the kid, though, and I'll rip you a new one. Code 2, a goddamn civilian." Her blue eyes fell on Ava. "Who's this?" the woman asked Azuma, striding over. He pushed Ava forward.
Prout's student.
It dawned on Ava what might be going on. Her breath stuck in her throat. "Did you just say shoot Prout?" she croaked. "As in Neni?" The woman placed a hand on her armored hip and stared at Ava. Her lidded gaze showed no empathy or any emotion at all, in fact. She was the top dog here, and she knew it. Ava studied her cheekbones. "My name is Justicate Hara," she said. "You are detained for questioning concerned with NENI-LOHI PROUT's recent breach of contract. Anything you say." The floor shook, and shouts of alarm came from the left corridor, followed by a resounding boom. Hara took 2 steps away and twisted her left hand through the air. She held it out, like proffering an invisible ball, and a grainy orange head appeared in Hara's palm, features hidden beneath a helmet. "What the hell was that?" she asked it. "The elevator's down! They snagged it!" replied the helmet, a male voice. "Anyone inside?" "We don't know yet." Hara growled and spoke through clenched teeth. "Then get in the other one. Assume they are alive." "The other elevator? But what if they sabotage?" "Did I stutter?" Hara raised her fist, and Ava fought the compulsion to run in search of the stairs. "Run, Neni," she wanted to say. "Whatever you've done, this woman wants you crushed." But Neni wouldn't steal a knife. She wouldn't do something so stupid. Why was she in trouble? What had gone wrong? Ava knew one thing. She wouldn't let Hara put her on a backseat for questioning. Her veins throbbed. Nobody touches Neni until I know what the heck's going on. But her resolve wavered when Hara turned back to her, eyes glistening with purpose. Behind Hara, a Catharian planted himself in the centre of the lobby. Ava had never seen a Justicate wear armour like his. Half of it had to be decorative. The collar fanned above his head, and the symbol of the Just glimmered in gold upon his back. He turned to Hara, and when he spoke, Ava recognised him as the High Justice, the Cathar who had interviewed her during the trial of the demolition criminals. Hara and Azuma saluted. Ava copied, her legs swaying.
Where's the feed?
The High Justice barked. Drones were deployed. It shouldn't be. Hara stopped speaking as the surface of the blast shield covering the lobby window lit up with moving images. Ava glanced at the ceiling, where she saw a white drone casting the projection. There, said Hara. Live feed is active.
Good,
said the High Justice.
Get out there. Yes. I'll orders you from here.
Sir. Hara saluted again and sprinted off. She seemed to bound farther than the average human, as if her chunky boots propelled her along. Ava looked back at the projection, a grey, white, blue image of events upstairs. The docking bay was laid out before them, the image bobbing up and down with the movements of the drone doing the filming. The ships and shuttles looked small from that angle, until she saw security guards lining up at the bottom right of the screen. Tiny figurines in comparison. At the opposite end of the bay, NENI-LOHI emerged from an air filter in the floor. Gunfire flashed across the screen. Ava stopped breathing. Sweat ran slick down her back, between her breasts, across her face. Her feet ached, no longer used to running without armoured boots. When she next got the chance to sit down, Neni vowed to appreciate the sweet sensation of resting her feet. 20 flights of stairs up, and she was ready to die. How did Arkadash maintain an unrelenting, onward march, floor after floor? At least she wasn't as slow as that boy. Neni wished he'd give up and crumple on the stairs. She wished he'd disappear. He wasn't their problem. They didn't need more problems. What if Xing had planned for this whole thing to fail? What if he'd wanted to have Neni caught? Bile filled her throat at the thought, and she gripped the banister tighter. "What's wrong?" gasped the boy, bumping into her backside. It was more of an accusation. "Nothing," she spat. Xing was Arkadash's best friend. He wouldn't betray him so deeply. But this still left Dristan Potts unaccounted for. Gawping and wheezing and whimpering and not the guy taking me to Mars. Floor 30. 10 more staircases to go. The corridors had been sealed off, while the elevators remained open. They were funneling them towards the docking bay, or giving the option to take an elevator. Did the Just believe Neni was that stupid? "Sure, I'll just hop in this elevator, and, oh, why is it falling towards the ground and gaining speed?" To be honest, it seemed like less hassle than climbing all these stairs. Potts certainly thought so too. "No!" he cried, after what felt like hours of silence. "I can't!" He flung his dumpy ass down and cried dry tears, face crumpled in agony. Neni closed her eyes in resignation, freezing mid-step. She didn't have to see Arkadash to know what he would do next.
Get up,
he said, the order softened by exhaustion.
We can't wait for you.
Exactly, Neni shot, surprising herself. She opened her eyes and fixed her gaze on the steps ahead. Let's go. Leave him, Ark. We don't need him. He's already in the way. Arkadash lumbered down a few steps to be closer to her and bent forward. He stared at her with a hard, righteous gleam in his eyes.
How can you say that?
He asked.
He's implicated. What do you think they'll do to him? The just are black and white in their methods. You should know that by now.
Don't you talk down to me, she whispered, drowning in the sounds of her beating heart. It ached. Everything ached. Anger and fear burnt through her like cheap wine, and she couldn't stop shivering. I'll hand myself in, Potts croaked, and threw himself into the elevator.
No!
Cried Arkadash. He shoved past Neni and dived down the stairs. The elevator groaned and jolted down a notch. The boy's eyes met Neni's and terror stiffened him in place, his skin pale beneath the elevator's yellow lights. Young, open, trusting. For a split second, Neni saw her brother staring up at her, crouched behind a stack of crates. His faith in her, gone. A long, echoing groan filled the elevator shaft. I'm sorry, Neni wanted to say, but the words never left her mouth. Arkadash seized Potts by the arm just as the elevator released its suspensions. A scream rent the air, her scream, and Neni forced herself to look away. Ark! She yelled. Glancing back, she saw Potts quivering in Arkadash's arms and gulping for air.
Breathe,
said Arkadash, inhaling just as heavily.
Don't hyperventilate.
Neni buckled on the steps and stared at Arkadash with fresh eyes. She tried to take in every detail as if they'd never met before. The charming streaks of grey in his hair, the deep smile lines around his eyes, Potts' freckled hands against Ark's dark arms. What did it feel like to really hug him? To press against his chest and smooth her hands up and down his back. If they made it out of this alive, Neni promised to find out. She'd waited too long. Her wandering imagination faltered as she heard muffled shouts coming from behind the sealed-off corridor. Come on! She cried, leaping to her feet. Potts pushed away from Arkadash. I can't! Without a word, Arkadash dragged Potts up the next flight of stairs.
We'll take the ladder,
he said to Neni as he strode past. The air filter, she cried. You'll never fit. You're too broad. Arkadash gave a mirthless laugh.
There's a tasteless joke on the tip of my tongue,
he replied, slapping Potts' hand on the ladder at the top of the steps. It disappeared into a small hatch in the ceiling. He glared down at the boy.
Climb,
he said. But Potts hesitated. Ugh, move! Neni shoved him aside and scrambled up as fast as she dared. Arkadash only had to threaten Potts once before he followed after her. Ark climbed up last, scaring Potts to move faster by uttering low, sharp commands. Neni just focused on one rung after the next, not thinking about the tight, inescapable squeeze of the shaft, or the thin, heady gushes of air filtering past them. On and on and on. Everything ends, she told herself. Everything ends, including this ladder. Dizzy and trembling, Neni's hands finally touched the exit hatch. She shoved it off with all the strength she had left and launched herself out into the docking bay. Totally exposed. Gunfire rang in her ears. She registered the firing squad with barely a glance and sprinted across the open bay. Couldn't die now. Had to make it. Had to run. A ragged, wild energy sprang to life inside Neni, and her fatigue melted away into a desperate, maddening fire. It heated her blood and sharpened her mind. Neni took cover behind the hull of a deep space frigate. On the other side of the bay stood the shuttles, each one clamped to the floor and looking out to the stars. The atmosphere shield pulsed steadily from floor to ceiling. Just one thin membrane between death and freedom. The firing squad stood between Nenni's position behind the frigate and the shuttles on the other side. Their weapons sounded again as Potts poked his head out of the air filter. If only it was closer to the shuttles! He ducked out of sight, and the squad was ordered to cease fire. "Civilian!" bellowed a harsh, female voice. A chilling silence descended on the bay as the Justicates strode to the centre of their ranks. Nenni trembled, and her stomach revolted at the sight of Hara. Her navy blue armour shone beneath the lights, but Nenni's eyes were drawn to the flash of gold in her chest. An Anishim knife. "Dristan Potts!" called Hara, her words clear for everyone to hear. "Surrender now, and you will not be harmed. By the second code, second addendum, your life is protected. You will stand trial according to the laws of non-combatants." Nenni twisted and flexed her hands into fists. She racked her brain for a solution, but couldn't focus. Everything was spiraling into panic. She couldn't leave Ark behind, but she couldn't help him either. He was stuck behind Dristan fucking Potts. The boy's sandy head emerged from the air filter again. He climbed out with agonizing slowness and searched the bay until he spotted Nenni not far away. "She's to the right," he whispered, looking like he might swallow his own tongue. Nenni whipped around, scouting to the right, but no one was there. Was he talking to Arkadash? "What was that?" cried Hara. "Don't shoot!" Potts replied, voice cracking. He crawled forward a few paces, shivering as if he'd been electrocuted. As Potts wobbled onto his feet, Arkadash burst out of the air filter, wrapped one arm around the boy's chest, and hunkered down so their cheeks pressed together. They started shuffling towards Nenni's position. The firing squad readied their weapons, and Hara began charging across the floor space.
"Stop, or he's dead!"
yelled Arkadash, but Hara didn't seem to care. She raised her palm and must have sensed the seeping wound in his shoulder, filling Nenni with a pang of guilt. She'd forgotten all about Ark's injury. Ark stopped in his tracks, paralyzed, as Hara took hold of the natural electrostatic forces within his system. Nenni regretted not taking painkillers that evening. She should have expected things to go so terribly wrong. Unclipping her belt and holding her breath, Nenni gouged the metal into her hand. Blistering agony shot up her entire arm, and she let out a strangled scream. It drew Hara's attention, but before she could react, Nenni stretched out her arm and fired. "Big, thumping bullets," she thought. 3 curved dents appeared on Hara's armour. She staggered back as each one hammered into her and blood sprayed across her cheeks. Nenni's blood. The attack didn't injure Hara, but it winded her, and Nenni saw a flicker of fear in her face. A cruel smile twisted Nenni's lips. That hadn't expected to feel satisfying. Hara's hold over Arkadash vanished, and he and the boy made it to Nenni's side.
"Nenni,"
Ark panted.
"you have to do something."
"Like what?" she hissed. Peering around the frigate clamps, Nenni caught sight of John. With him were 3 justices from their training unit, and 5 justicates she didn't recognize. She ducked back, pressing herself to the clamps.
"Like this."
Arkadash drew the jagged Anishim knife and held it out to her. "No! Ark, this is what I'm trying to get away from!"
"Yes, and if you do this just one more time, you will never have to do it again."
"No! Not even for you." They could still get out of this. She could say Ark wasn't to blame, that she'd blackmailed him. They didn't all have to die. Demolition might not even hurt that much. "Sorry, Ark," she said, standing shakily, holding her hands up in surrender.
"No,"
he said in a frail voice.
"I'm sorry."
and he plunged the knife into her neck.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.